Hey, folks, welcome back to the Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. It is 2 o'clock Central Texas time. And thanks for joining me today. What a crazy topic we've got to cover today. This is going to be an interesting one. I just wanted to say welcome back. We're going to be talking about really an extension of yesterday. We're talking about the chaos business model. And today we're talking about what's to come. Is there going to be a Black Swan event tomorrow? Friday the 13th, which I think in common Western culture would be a representation of a day of evil, right? We know of the horror movies, the Friday the 13th, but there's an origin to that. And here we find ourselves on Thursday, October 12th. And I've been really digging into this whole Hamas attack on Israel. And then, of course, I'm a student of the Bible and looking to see, are we seeing, prophecy being fulfilled? I'm not the place you come for prophecy. I do not offer myself as a prophet or any view into that. But I think that this is an interesting topic when it comes to what I normally talk about, and that's crypto. And so I want to start with saying hello to you in the chat. That's what we typically do. And then we're going to be talking about this. And I've got a special guest coming in about 30 minutes who's going to give us a unique perspective. So you're definitely going to want to share this out. You're going to want to like it, subscribe if you are not, because this is going to be, I think, a special one. Especially, I'm kind of setting this up for my special guest to give you some perspective. But let's say hello to our friends that are here. And number one again today, Sam Kemp. Beginning to look like we have, yeah, you're absolutely right. Some answers to what the Black Swan events may be. And we're going to talk about what is a Black Swan event and is it something that you can't even predict? I use that. I mean, it's a bit of clickbait, but I think it's important to understand different perspectives on what's going on. I look at things differently than a number of people do. I look at what's happening in the world through a different lens, a different worldview. And I think it's important in our cryptosphere, which most people are concerned about money. And, you see things happening in the world and a lot of things you're thinking, well, how does this affect the markets? I want to go beyond that. I want to talk beyond that. And also I want to express really what has been so troubling to me. And this is why you tune in. You get a perspective. But I also want to be encouraging to you as well, because I have a tremendous amount of hope in the midst of all this chaos. So, Sam, thanks for being here, my friend. Anders, what's going on? Things are heating up across the pond. There is no question about it. Yeah, Sam Kemp says, keep your powder dry. David Lee, all the way from southwestern Indiana, always showing up, showing his support. Hugs all around from him. And Freddie Quotes. Man, I'll tell you what, Freddie Quotes, your song, Revelations, couldn't have come at a better time. It is great to see you here in the chat as well. Appreciate you so much. Honcho, good afternoon, everyone. Eshkatar, howdy. Drix, what's up, Drix? Folks, I'm going to get Drix on the channel here. Hopefully next week. I've got a couple interviews I want to set up. Drix is one of them. I think Drix is an enigma wrapped in a riddle, man. I think he's going to be one of these really, really interesting guys. Actually, I know he is. And, that's what I'm interested in. The context and texture of our community. Right? Understanding people. Because what's so amazing is I think about this when I go to church and pay your taxes, Mr. Anderson. I think about all the people who are kind of sitting out there, right? I go to this church and, then maybe there's like, I don't know, 600 people sitting in a room. And I just imagine as I look across, I'm like, think about how rich of the experiences these people have. What are their stories? And I feel that same way about our community. It's just like this is what is so beautiful about it is just this tapestry of experiences. Because from my view, you have a purpose to your life, right? This has all been kind of spelled out in these. It's amazing. Even the poor decisions you make become context of teaching, and it becomes a perspective, and it's really cool. So Drix, look forward to having you on the channel. Hexonium, what's going on? Anders, Godfather J6, Crypto Compassion, always in support. Crypto Pez, hey Matt, watching from Spain. Just shared on Twitter. Thank you so much for sharing this. We're going to be talking about tomorrow. There's a lot of rumors about what is happening tomorrow. They're calling it a call for a day of jihad. And what does that mean? We're going to be talking about that. But really, you know what I'm doing this for? I'm teeing everybody up. This is like the longest softball pitch to my guest, a special guest who's going to be coming on to give us some perspective. How should we be looking at the things that are in the world? And we have a bit of a precursor if you've been watching some of the things we've been doing on this channel. But I'm basically setting up to that because there's a lot of mainstream views of people, whether they be in crypto, people that are in the church, people that are into fear porn, if you know what that is. Just everyone's so fearful of everything and getting everyone worked up about things. And the question is, what hope do we have? Hex Force One, good to see. Crypto Heartbeat, obey the code. Beans, bullets, and band-aids are a stable coin. Whoa, there you go. There's some prophecy right there. Anders, there's a reaction. Oh, a recreation park just outside of Belgrade where it used to be black swans and the like. Interesting. I bet you that's a beautiful thing. Drix is the real deal, Freddie Quote says. Fantastic. Awesome, Drix. What happened to Texan on ETH? We had somebody okay, so the person who dumped the price so much on ETH was a free claimer, and they bought a ton of Texan. And it looks like they were hacked, but we don't know who it is. And yeah, it was a surprise to everyone. But you know what? That's the thing. So let's get into the content here. Mobius, what's going on? Good to see you. So let's get into the content. I want to share something with you. We're going to start this out the right way. I'm going to present to you what is a black swan. We've covered this before, but I think it's worth going into again. There's a theory. It's called Black Swan theory, and it's a theory of black swan events. It's a metaphor that describes an event that comes as a surprise, has a major effect, and is often inappropriately rationalized after the fact with the benefits of hindsight. Okay, so this idea that most swans are white, this is a surprising thing. There's a black swan. But I think that the key to the black swan is that you didn't anticipate potentially the severity of it. And so this is commonly used in the financial markets. It's something that kind of was a surprise or out of the blue. Now, in retrospect, though, it seems like, oh yeah, well, that makes sense. And you think about the 2008 crisis, or you think about, especially the housing crisis, for example. Oh, it was such a surprise to everyone, right? But when you look back on it, you're like, yeah, there's sleep at the wheel, and it was intentional. So the big question is this: all that's happening in the world, is this just another regional conflict? Hey, some people want to get some territory and some land. I'm going to give you my perspective on what I think is going on, and then my guest is going to share probably a much broader perspective on how we process this. And I'm really excited about that. So, the black swan theory. What is it? It is this idea that something happens that is unanticipated and potentially more severe than we would anticipate, that would be shocking to the market. I had a number of people send me things this morning. Sam Kemp was one of them, who talked to me about, hey, there are people calling for Ethereum at $600 to $800. So just stop for a second. If something happened in the world that caused Ethereum to go to $600, right, which would likely push Bitcoin down to $10,000, I think that would qualify as a reaction to a black swan. Well, that's interesting, right? And there's always been, right? There's bulls and there's bears and all of these things. But I find it to be really interesting what's happening right now in the Middle East in this context. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share you my perspective and my opinion and kind of what I've gathered. And I'm going to compare that and contrast that with what's going on in crypto and potentially what could happen there. And then we're going to have a guest, and we're going to talk about a bunch of things that relates to the broader way in which we could look at these things, because I think my guests' approach to things often is counterintuitive, and that's what I love about it. Okay, so let's talk about what's happening. So, if you've been paying attention to, the facts on the ground, this group called Hamas, and we know this Hamas group, at least from an American perspective, is a terrorist organization. These are the folks in Gaza, not to be confused with the Palestinian people. I want to make sure that's very clear. Hamas is a group of people, right? This is a terrorist ideology. Now, oftentimes, I think you see people that are supporting, the Palestinian state, and basically claiming that those families that live in the Gaza Strip, for example, are Hamas, and they are not. Then there's another group called Hezbollah. They're up in the north out of Lebanon or Syria area, Syria and Lebanon. And you've got a group from the north, and you've got obviously this group, Hamas. And they've been essentially in power in the Gaza Strip. So, for example, Hamas for 16 plus years, and they've been funded primarily by Iran. And of course, if you look at Iran, most people don't know that, surprisingly, the culture of Iran is surprisingly secular, even though it's led by a group of clerics, and there's, Sharia law and all of these things. It's they're not the ones that are fighting with in traditional warfare, right? They work through proxies, and obviously funding of um, Hamas and Hezbollah is, part of it. Well, who are these people, right? Who is Hamas and Hezbollah? What does Hamas say they are in their absolute, definitions of their charter and their purpose is ultimately to destroy the nation of Israel, but the people, the Jews themselves. And yesterday I talked about this video from 1947 called "Don't Be a Sucker," and the War Department after the war put together this video that said, "Hey, we need to realize what we have here in America, and let's not let what happened in Nazi Germany happen again." And I shared it because it was so relevant to what we were dealing with now culturally in the United States. But then when you lay over this attack, right? So what has happened? A coordinated attack from multiple locations led by Hamas. And what did they do? They attacked and celebrated the attack of civilians and children and the elderly, and a massacre of people, you know, babies, everything, right? Now, it's interesting when you think about warfare. What typically I think Western people think of war is they think of, well, there's a military that has territory and another military that has territory, and those official military people fight each other. And that the Western view that is based on the Judeo-Christian ethic is that lives are valuable, and that, we generally fight over territory. And so there's a delineation here that I think is important to delineate, and that there is this, you know, there's this territorial dispute, but also there is a fundamental worldview um, war, if you will, that's going on. That is, um, you could say it's religious, right? You could define it as that. It is definitely ideological, and it is led by and promoted by this idea of essentially exterminating a group of people. And so if you look back into the Nazi era, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have 4K um, cameras on our phones. And what's really interesting, I heard a number of commentators say this, that back during the time of, the Holocaust, for example, there were people that, literally journalists, that went in to try to understand what was happening in Auschwitz and all of these, examining what was really going on the ground, because we didn't have the ability to communicate like we have today. And even through all of what was uncovered that had happened during the Holocaust, there was, I think it was Ben Shapiro said this today or yesterday. He said, even the Nazis tried to cover up what they had done. And I want to camp out on this idea for just a second. We know the stories of essentially genocide, of, the Holocaust, and really taking a group of people and literally exterminating them. But even the Nazis recognized at some level that hiding the evidence of that, why would you do that? Right? If you have a certain understanding that what you're doing is probably not right in general, kind of a moral not right. But what do we see today? And I think this is the important distinction that we make with what's going on in the world. is here we are, a group of people who have been convinced that they need to destroy and eliminate at all costs any Jew, no matter where they are. And this is happening right in front of us. And of course, a lot of people are like, oh, no, no, they're not really terrorists. They're just people fighting for land. No, no, no. These are two different things. Why do I say that? Because the celebration and the actual um, promotion of their activity, live streaming executions, literally killed a grandmother and posted it to her Facebook page, her killing, the video of it on her Facebook page so her family would see it. And you think about this idea of literally bragging and showing the world. And what I am just stunned by is that a lot of the things that in the past, because of communication technology and such, were in the dark, right? We often know and we kind of compare that evil happens in the darkness, right? And it's hidden, and it's people doing things behind closed doors, and it's secretive, and that's where evil lurks, in the dark. And what are we seeing today? That all of these things are becoming exposed. And we're seeing these things. And you go from, contrasting the Nazis going, well, yeah, if people found out that we had did this, let's cover this up. There's the reason you'd cover it up because you relate to what you've done. And then a group of people, right, in the last 4 or 5 days who are bragging about and posting and saying, hey, look. And it's interesting, the difference, but the same thing that was written in Mein Kampf by Hitler is essentially what Hamas is doing to the Jews now. And I think a lot of people around the world are believing this idea that, well, this is just over land. This is just over territory. There are there's a political view of this, but then there's also one that is much more deeply rooted in something that I would consider to be pure evil. And the fact that we are confused about the difference is really my biggest issue in this whole situation. And so that leads me to this. Why do I even, name this stream Friday the 13th Black Swan? So let's look into it, and I will share with you why that is the case. So, what has been called for by the former head of Hamas? Okay, this guy right here. Okay, this guy right here. And let me see if I can zoom in on this because I want you to. I'm gonna read the subtitles on this so you can hear what he's saying. And he's the ex-chief of Hamas, and what he's calling on for tomorrow. Okay, and it's important you know the whole
أدعوكم
thing.
وأنا
So I
معكم
call on
بكل
you, me being included as well, as we're responsible for this, to start with the things that we are used to, but with a higher ceiling. First of all, for anger, to head to the squares and streets of the Arab and Islamic world on Friday, the Friday of Al Qasa flood, which is, we can go into that in a second. This is deliver a message through the squares and the streets, a message of anger that we are with Palestine. And we're going to break this down here. So, that we are with Gaza, with Jerusalem, that we are part of this battle. This is first. Second, Gaza is calling for your help with relief and money or whatever you own, whatever can help. This is the moment of truth. What should we answer? We are facing truth. And here I say clearly, without hesitation, this is the moment for the Arab nation to join in the fight, to fight with them. I call firstly the surrounding countries, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt, all of its sons and daughters. Officially and popularly, your duty is bigger because you are close to Palestine. Tribes of Jordan, sons of Jordan, brothers and sisters of Jordan, from all your sides and backgrounds. This is the amount of truth, and the borders are close to you. You all know your responsibility, and this applies to all nations. To all scholars who teach jihad for the sake of God and who preach the fighters and martyrs, to all who teach and learn, this is the moment for your application of theories so that our words are not just words. This, to me, is bone chilling. If you see the things the way I see these things, this is the former leader of Hamas calling for jihad tomorrow, a day of jihad. So, how do I see it? And I'm really teeing this up for our guest because I'm really hoping our guest has something to share with us that provides us with a unique perspective. Why would the former head of Hamas call on people from all around the surrounding areas? Well, he's calling on the folks from around the area that agree with him, right? And they're trying to tie together two things. One, this territorial dispute with one of support of the jihad or religious war and martyrdom to eradicate the nation of Israel because they look at Israel as ultimately an occupying force. There's a lot of stories of history that would suggest, who actually was occupying that area. You could go back even to Roman times. What's interesting about this is this call for a day of jihad tomorrow, which I find the irony of it being on Friday the 13th. Interesting data point. But more importantly, that they would be rallying people and taking people who don't understand the context and trying to convince them that this is a war of land and a state of Palestine, right? That this would be just, hey, we just want some land. But if you really understand what they're saying and what their charter is, the goal is to eradicate the Jews. And if you think about what is going on between and the challenges and the purpose, as I understand it, of Hamas and Hezbollah is ultimately, kill the Jews first, kill all infidels, which would include Christians, and then you think about the Sunni Shia thing, kill the other Muslims that don't agree with you, right? This whole idea that not just Israel as a nation, but the Jewish people should be eliminated from earth. This is barbaric. It is evil, and it's genocide. And what's interesting about it is when I reflect on what happened, we didn't have all this technology. These things were done in the dark. We didn't know for months what was happening in Auschwitz. There were people that had to go in and write these things and tell us about it. We found out after the fact. We're seeing in real time people who are not like you and me. And what I mean by that is this isn't like, well, we disagree on our political future, blue versus red. No, this is a group of people that believes that if you're a Jew, you should be exterminated. And I think a lot of us these days thought, well, that's stuff that happened in the past, right? That stuff won't happen today. Well, ask that to the Belgian people in 1996 with what happened in Rwanda when 1 million people that knew each other, were part of families, literally were pitted against one another and cut up with machetes. Genocide, right? How these things happen. And I look at this and I go, this is not a discussion of morality from a Western perspective. When you're dealing with people, and why and how can you convince young people to essentially strap bombs to themselves and to kill as many Jews as possible? And that there is a benefit, right? This life of living does not have enough to live for, that you would strap bombs on yourself, and that would be the glory and hope that you have, that there would be some blessing for your destruction here. That's the world that we're in. It's very troubling, but it's also one of these things where it's like we need to sound an alarm. Because I think what the mainstream media and the folks that are supporting this effort, whether they're directly or indirectly doing it, silence is not an option. You have to choose a side. And for anyone that would say, well, this is just because it's an occupying force, this is a political thing, and this is about land, is incorrect. This is an ideology, and this is one that is rooted in pure evil. When you have no concerns about human life and that you are willing to execute civilians, that's the purpose of an entire group of people, to wipe them from the face of the earth. We need to sit up and pay attention. Now, that's a perspective, and it may be different than the perspective that you have. But it's troubling. And I think this is common for a lot of people, is how do I make sense of this stuff? And, I'm normally talking just about crypto, right? I'm talking about crypto, or I'm talking about Jesus with Steve Staggs, right? Those are kind of my two topics of preference. But when it comes to this, and you can see in Technicolor on social media families, and one of the videos that touched me so much today was I literally was looking in, seeing a video of a family, and I was imagining myself or somebody that I know, and I saw the fear. And this little boy, his sister had been murdered, and the literally Hamas fighters were out front of the house, and you could hear the gunfire going off, and you could see. And I have a little boy myself, and you could see the terror and fear because he had seen his sister get killed. And there's two kids and two parents there. The dad's hands are bleeding, and you're looking at them, and you're seeing these are not. This is not an Israeli military young man. This is a family cowering inside of their home, and to see these folks literally be treated like trophies of execution. And when you see that barbarism, when you see that, we didn't see that before, right? We never had the opportunity to see that. But what is being called for by this former leader of Hamas is that would be widespread worldwide. Now, when you're not think about this. They're not a military force. Hamas isn't an army. It's an ideology, a group of people that have, gotten a lot of handouts over the years. And what do they have to show for it? Have they made the lives of the people better? No, they send in equipment, they send in materials, building materials, and Hamas takes it and ends up using it to, fight with Israel. And so there hasn't been a desire, which you would consider from a normal kind of, governmental process, to support the people and make their lives better. So I want to make sure it's really, really clear. The people that live in the Gaza Strip, the folks that are Palestinian people, I have no issue with. What I'm concerned with is that we have devolved, and there's a group of people who literally promote and have promoted for years. It's not like it's in hiding. It's like a secret, strategy they have. No, they've made it extremely clear, and there was a whole group of people in Australia that were supporting this effort with, you know, basically saying gas the Jews, chanting gas the Jews. At what point in time do we stand up to this stuff? Because I feel like if I don't speak out against it, it's like, well, it's okay because it's not happening on my back doorstep because my kids are safe and we've got to go to a volleyball game tonight. And it really overwhelmingly weighs upon me as the battle is not between flesh and blood. Battle is between good and evil. And how this all relates to what's going on in this world is, hey, what are we doing together? I think this is a group of the most hopeful people around. They're like, hey, I can look over any differences. We're going to win together. Hey, let's be in unity. Hey, when next bull run? When Lambo? Right? Optimism, hope, a new system. My guest would say, well, we're going to find out what he says. But one of the things I admire about him is understanding the times that we live in is recognizing that this world is upside down. And so what does it mean for it to be right side up? And what does it mean when all of these things are failing us around us? How do we need to view it? So ladies and gentlemen, welcome back my guest, Steve Ostags. What's up, Steve?
Well, hello there. How are you doing?
Hey, I can't believe I'm talking to you on a Thursday. But I wanted to tee this up, and I wanted to communicate what I would consider to be one, my own personal perspective, but also kind of a mainstream perspective of what's happening. I didn't go into the biblical because there's a whole group of people who are, trying to read the tea leaves through Ezekiel 38, 39 and all of these things. I don't have time for that right now. It's more of a concern of understanding the symptoms of this upside down world and the rotting from within. But I also wanted to get your perspective on how you see this, because to me it looks like evil exposed.
Well, yeah, it is. Hey, and thanks for being interested in my perspective on this. That I'm not going to share, any of the kind of traditional ways of viewing it at this point, because if you net it out, um, and Israel is both the target and the central element in this. Israel was either taken by surprise or it was very strategic.
Yep.
And so if it was a surprise, okay, that's one set of perspectives that could be created around it. If it was strategic, then that's an entirely different thing. But in both regards, it's what I would call one-dimensional. It is simply looking at what we see with our physical eyes and then reacting to it, which then kind of takes me back to, I think, our very first string, which was I think one of the early comments was that one of the ways we have been trained to think and operate is from an event orientation standpoint. We look at an event, we evaluate that event. That event then causes us to then assess the circumstances that we find ourselves in, or the circumstances that will be created out of the event. And then we make a decision or take an action in reaction to that event. And that, I don't know if I'm speaking for everybody, and I certainly haven't met everybody on the planet, but I would say that pretty much describes how I was trained to think, and then how I observed others over the many years now, how we operate.
So what you're saying, so let me ask you this. So what you're saying then is we always are looking at things happen, and we react to those
To
things that
those
happen, those
things.
events. Okay, keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we start inserting all kinds of ideas, thoughts, biases, impressions, all kinds of things we insert into that, and then create some kind of an intellectual framework about why it happened, you know, who's to blame, who's the good guy, who's the bad, all those various things. Not realizing that when we react, we are the second actor. That to react means that somebody prior to us first acted, and then we are reacting to that first action. And when our lifestyle, our way of living is trained to do that, then what ends up happening is we are in a constant reaction mode, which means we are actually being led, or are followers of the one who first acted.
Okay, got it.
So guess what happens? You end up asserting all kinds of things, not realizing that you are actually being led to a particular place because you've already been conditioned to think in a particular way. And so even though our reaction mentality makes us think that we're going to take the bull by the horns and regain control and do all that stuff, all we're actually doing is just following the lead of the one who first acted.
So let me interrupt you there and run two perspectives, because you made this point right at the very beginning. And so with everything that I've seen in my 50 years, I've kind of learned that sometimes I'm surprised that there will be people in our personal lives as well as globally who will intentionally try to draw us off sides by getting us to react or overreact to something. And
Yes.
then there's also this concept of, one of the big question marks around this whole conflict is, one of the greatest, and sharpest intelligence agencies on planet Earth, and one of the most well guarded from a security perspective nations, is Israel and the Mossad. And there's two things that happened that I think are really baffling. One is the Iron Dome didn't work. And after it got turned back on, it worked like 100%. And two, they acted as if they had no idea, even though Egypt warned them 3 days ahead of time.
Yeah.
And so when I see those data points, I get suspect of things. And now, in the context of what you're saying, I'm kind of teeing you up with, all right, you could say, was it a surprise? Or was it something was intentionally let happen so that there would be a context or a pre-context for the actions, right? Drawing them off sites. Now, I'm not disagreeing that Hamas did do this attack, but the question is the severity of it and the lack of interrupting it strategic?
Well, there you go. It's either a surprise or a trap.
Yeah.
And so if it's a surprise, then there's a failure of leadership, there's a failure of decision making. They themselves are in a reaction mode.
Yep.
So the question is Israel in a reaction mode where they are being led somewhere? This is all at the human level. Or is Israel being more strategic and they know exactly what's going to happen, but they're setting a trap? And the trap is actually to grant the appearance of an unprovoked attack that caught an unsuspecting nation off guard, so as to provide a maximum opportunity to assert the maximum amount of force to accomplish what has to be a mission critical strategic objective.
Yep. And
Okay.
and what that implies though when you say that, and it's so hard to imagine, right? In our, in my general worldview of, limited, basic, protecting family, those kind of things, that you would sacrifice your own citizens for the bigger strategic goal, is that you would say, all right, I'm going to let this happen so that I have the context for this, use of force in a way that, and I could make a really strong case that this strategy, if that's the case, has been brewing for years. And I could
Oh,
use
yeah.
clips directly from Prime Minister Netanyahu. I don't want to believe that, of course. However, it's on the table. And I mean, that's part of the reason I want to bring you in. All right, we're reacting to something. Is this a surprise or is it a calculated strategic plan?
Yeah. Because let's face it. America is one of the only nations in the world that has forgotten how to engage war.
Right.
When we look at the other nations when they're at war, and we see it most specifically here with Hamas, and then in reaction, supposedly, I would say it's more of a counterpunch that was intended and strategically set up as a trap. That um, that when we see how Hamas conducts war, that is the way war has been conducted over the entirety of the planet's experience with human beings being on it. This is what war looks like, going back to the days of Lamech, back in Genesis 4. This is what war looks like. This is um, Chedorlaomer and his alliance of 4 kings coming after the 5 kings, in that area, dealing strategically in order to make the innocent, peace-loving target relax when they thought that his army was then moving beyond them to go see somebody else. But the scriptures say, and then he turned back. Well, why did Chedorlaomer turn back? Because he was setting a trap. He was making his target feel like they were at ease so that when he returned, their defenses would be down and they would be caught off guard. Well, so we're the only nation on the planet who's forgotten how war is engaged. And so when we see these kinds of casualties, we are not only alarmed, but we are aghast at the tragedy that's there. But what's really happening is we are just seeing what war actually is. See that? This is what war looks like. which then to me raises the question, well, how did war even get here? Why is it here? What is this all about? What in all those videos that are going around and the Hamas leader of Hamas making these declarations, what kind of world does that guy live in? And yet it's easy for us to point the finger at him and those folks when we see that kind of tragedy. But the bigger question is, why is that stuff even here? I mean, why is it even here? How did it get here? Why is it operating? What is its strategic intentions? What the heck is going on? So the thing that I would suggest to folks, and I think is maybe even the reason you asked me to come on here, is my first input would be, as horrific as it is, don't react to it. Take a step back out of it, survey it from a broader perspective, and then start looking at it from, again, a more strategic perspective. Why are these things happening? What is behind them? What is the outcome they're trying to achieve? Not from a specific standpoint, because you don't have information, but you do have an ability to gain a macro perspective on it. So what would that look like? For example, what is it that we're actually observing here before our eyes? Well, I'll give you I'm going to call it a spiritual perspective that I've written about, and you and I have talked about along with others. But what's happening here is the kingdom of darkness, Satan's kingdom, is falling apart at the seams. It is actually, as of the Ukrainian war, now in a state of absolute civil war. The leader of his government is pursuing a strategy that is not acceptable to another power spirit in that realm. And so that power spirit is moving to try to reassert its position of strength and power so it can rule that domain. In other words, what I'm describing to you is the machine behind the machine. Now, to some people, that's interesting. To some people, it's vital. To other people, it's not only not interesting, it sounds loony.
Yeah.
Okay? Well, okay, then that's a perspective that you can either pursue or not.
So
but it is an example of how to step out and begin to survey not just the event itself, but to look at the event from a strategic standpoint, so you're not reacting to it. You're looking more to rule it. Now back to your question.
Okay, so I'm just going to say it back to you, because I like to look at these things this way, and I love to understand these alternative perspectives. So first and foremost, we see these videos, and your heart is broken for these families. I see myself in those situations. I see my friends in those situations, and I'm just like, it's so hard for me to fathom that somebody would decapitate a infant.
Yeah.
Okay, so I see this stuff and I'm shocked, right? I'm reacting to this. So this is layer one, right?
Yes.
This is what I'm seeing. Okay, then I back out one step from that and I say, all right, who are these players? And I see Hamas and I go, what are they all about? Okay, not sure I agree with that. And then I look at Israel and then I go, okay, who is this? And then I back out and I say, well, how are these people funded? And I said, well, okay, Israel is kind of in this sea of this Muslim world. But then I also see Hamas and Hezbollah for the last 20 plus years being funded by Iran, and then understanding who Iran is. And then I understand where the money is coming from for Israel, but then I have to back out another layer and I go, well, what is Israel? And what does Israel represent? And what happened in 1948 and this nation, right? So I can look at it from a lot of different perspectives, but then there's one extra layer that I can back out And you asked this right at the beginning, and I'm just making sure that I'm understanding these
Yeah.
layers. And that layer is, why does this exist in the first place? Why does war exist in the first place? And of
Yeah.
course, when I back out even further from that, I end up in the garden, and I
Yeah.
end up in this origin of doing things apart from God, which we would call sin, right? So,
Yeah.
am I capturing the layers here?
Well, absolutely. And you're seeing the first use of the proxy.
Yep.
So now you're getting a chance to go back and say, wow, this thing actually did have an origin.
Yeah.
Okay. Where did that origin come from? Well, if you talk about the serpent approaching Eve, and you then um, buy into the biblical picture that the serpent is actually a representation of the devil himself, uh, and then you go into movies like The Usual Suspects and all the things in culture and in life and religion that the devil represents, and then you see that that devil actually used a proxy.
Yeah.
And the proxy that the devil used, which is a spiritual being, an angelic being, it was the first to use a proxy in order to accomplish its conquest objectives. The devil's intention was to gain control via conquest of the garden, and not just the garden, the planet that the garden operated within, that was under the control of God's man. And that was the target. And he did not approach Adam or Eve directly. He used a proxy,
Which was the serpent,
which was a serpent.
the most crafty that the Lord God had made.
Yep. And by the way, the most wise and crafty.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
think about this prior to him using the proxy. You often said this in many of our streams, which I love the context. You're like, Eve was not surprised that she was talking to a serpent. So
Yeah.
if let's think of before this engagement, before the proxy was um, used,
Yeah.
there likely was consultation with the talking animals, which is just a bizarre concept to think about. But it used this one who had potentially, if it was seen as wise and most crafty, potentially as a trusted source of information for Eve.
Trusted advisor. Absolutely trusted
Wow.
advisor. Now you're getting the picture of what the proxy looks like.
Absolutely.
The proxy appears to be trustworthy to the target until it's not.
Yeah.
And so what you're looking at as you went through your various layers and stepping back and stepping back and stepping back, okay, if you were now put in that situation, which by the way, we live in that dynamic every day. We don't see it that way, but we do. We are constantly being approached with alternative points of view that seem to be wise and in our best interests. And yet, if you pause and you look at them closely enough, you find out that, hey, that, that is not only not a good deal, it's actually a trap. And it can take all kinds of forms, but it all has the same characteristics in the core, which is to appeal to me for my benefit only with a view towards securing from me what I have. And guess what? Now we're starting to see some of that happening in the Middle East. But more importantly, what is going on with the planet? All we are observing, and I don't want to minimize this as if to make, as if making some aloof statement, but as to stress a point that all we are looking at is the norm of planet Earth. So why does planet Earth operate this way? And is there something that we should understand about that and can then do something about it? Now, let me give you a picture of what that looks like. And these are all concepts, but at this point, because they're intended to emphasize this point that, listen, folks, we can deal with this But if we react our way to it, we're in trouble because we're going to be led right down the chute of where this thing is attempting to go. That is not in our best interest. Okay? They're in nobody's best interest except for those who have the strategic objective to seize absolute control of us. Now, we can look at that and we say, oh, yeah, Charles Schwab, those dirty rats. Let me tell you what, Charles Schwab does not have power one to do anything except that we grant it. And he does not have the intelligence, none of them do, to pull this thing off at the human level. There is a much bigger game that's being played where all of these people and things that we're seeing are merely pawns on a giant spiritual chessboard. And so, okay, what are we going to do about it? Are we really just pawns? And the answer is only because we accept that role. Why? Because we keep reacting. We're trained to react. And when you are trained to react, you are under the control of the one who has first acted.
Okay. I'm gonna run with that.
Okay?
Here's the challenge I have. There's obviously different people in this world, right?
Yeah.
I've got a close friend, I like, I'm a student of personality types,
Yeah.
right? And we know different people or have kind of a different way of looking at things, right?
Sure.
I remember we bought a company and the president of that company came in and she said to me, because I was being very cordial and very, trying to, work things out and make sure everything was going to work together well. And she looked at me across the table and she said, Matt, when you recognize that I don't have any feelings, things will go much better for you. That's a quote.
Yeah.
So there are people in this world now. So I want to juxtapose this. My heart breaks when I see these things. Okay.
Yeah.
On one hand, if I'm saying, okay, be aware, this is a reactionary thing. Someone first acted, you're getting information. This woman that was the president of this company we bought would say, such is life. That's how she would react. She'd be like, that's life, right? No, I'm not going to react to that. Where does the compassion for these things fit in? Because I've been wired to be one who is sensitive to and feels this pain. Now, I don't want to be controlled by it, certainly, but is there room for that compassion when faced with evil?
Well, absolutely. It is what rises to deal with the evil in the appropriate way.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah, okay. Jesus had this little statement that he said to the religious leaders in the day. He said, go and learn what this statement means. I desire compassion rather than a sacrifice. Okay, now think of the Hamas guy, leader, if he understood what Jesus just asked him, who, by the way, recognizes Jesus as a great prophet.
Yeah, the Muslim people do, yeah.
Yeah, and so Jesus said to him, hey, go and learn what this means. I desire compassion and not a sacrifice. Well, why did he direct that to the religious leaders? Because he's talking to them in the context of stepping back and saying, listen, you say you are being a follower of God. Go and find out what God means when he says, I desire compassion rather than a sacrifice. And then look and observe, which one are you operating in? Are you operating in the compassion side or in the sacrifice side? Because when you get into the religious, spiritual side of it, it is always about sacrifice.
Yeah.
See, and I'm not talking about sacrifice like you're giving up something. I'm talking about somebody is a casualty to appease a greater God who is not a God at all. But it has the thirst for blood that will choose to first require and demand a sacrifice in order to appease it. Well, what is it? What are we hearing? I will only be appeased by blood. I am angry. Oh, okay. You're angry. And what is your Allah to do? Now, I'm not getting into religious discussion. I'm talking at the spiritual domain level. Okay, so yes, compassion is absolutely essential, because what it does is it's stirring up a violation of the order that God created in his creation, that was designed to provide and produce peace and well-being. And compassion is then rises up when it sees something that is in violation of that.
Isn't
In
that
order
reactive
to,
though?
no, it's in response.
Response. Okay, so there's a difference between reaction and response?
Well, because of the way that the limitations of our language, we only have so many words
Yeah.
to convey ideas. Reaction is without thought. I then move to react.
Okay.
A response in this context is that, yeah, there is a violation, but in that violation, there is a moving of an order that is there to resolve and remedy that
Okay.
problem.
Okay.
That is not following, it's now reasserting a position of first action.
So what can we do from this perspective of having the right perspective of not responding? What can someone do? What can we do in this situation? What's your perspective on the right way to react or not react?
Okay. Yeah, that great question. Um, I'm gonna start with concepts, because the concept is the starting point. Um, it is learning to live in a different way. And let me give you a picture of this as a way of establishing a context. All right, going back to the garden, the the devil says, I want planet Earth and all that it represents, including man who has the authority to operate and rule planet Earth. So he sends its proxy, and the proxy is sent with a view toward assisting one of God's man, whose name was Eve. Okay, man, general term
Yep.
for um, mankind. And so what he's actually doing is setting a trap. When he sets the trap, what he does is, the effect of that trap being set and then tripped, man finds himself not only in a position of ruling the earth, being the ultimate authority on planet Earth. What happens is he finds that he has actually transferred his authority to not the serpent anymore. The serpent now is now representative of another being, the devil himself. So man now finds himself in a position of servitude. And the earth that is supposed to work on his behalf now starts working in opposition to him. The pictures, thorns and thistles, stuff
Yep.
like that. Okay. You start seeing the effect of this right away through the firstborn son,
Yep.
Cain, okay, who then slays his brother. And then not only do you see him slaying his brother, but then out of fear, he's now being expelled from the community. And what God does is, instead of God slaying him in retribution, what he does is he puts a mark on him and says, nobody will slay this man. Now, if that doesn't tell you what compassion looks like,
Yeah.
I don't know what is, and that's for a different story. But what you see right from the beginning is, you see an entirely different attitude that is viewed and how to deal with the earth. Now, I'm going to go back to Cain for a second, and as part of the answer to the question. For those who are familiar with this story, you know it. If you're not, you can go read about it in, I think it's Genesis 3, if my memory serves me correctly. But God actually goes and approaches Cain, and he says, Cain, why are you bummed out? If you do well and take your stand and operate in the higher character of my man, will your countenance not be raised? Will you not be not bummed out anymore? Will that not solve your problem? But he says, but sin is crouching at the door, sin operating apart from God in a different way and dimension. But sin is crouching at the door like a recumbent animal seeking to devour you. Okay. But you must master it. Now, this drives Christian people crazy, this story, because what it does is in the Christian realm, they've been taught, as I was taught, that you don't have any control over sin. You're just a filthy sinner, and that's all you are. And God has saved you by His grace, and you don't have any. You can't control that. You're just a plain sinner. Well, then why in the world did God tell Cain to master sin if we're not capable of mastering? Well, we know he didn't. The result was he slayed his brother. And what we have now is we start having this dynamic that occurred in the exchange between the serpent and Eve. We now have some of the results and the fruit of that starting to take shape. But what was God's response to it? He said, you must master it. Okay, you must master the perversion and then come back under my order. And when you do, then you'll start seeing things differently. All right, so how does that look in this present situation? Okay, well, let me ask some questions again. Are Egyptians living in Egypt? And we would say, yeah, sure there are. Okay, where is Pharaoh's government? Is Pharaoh's government still there? No, it isn't. Then who is superior? Pharaoh in all of his power back then, or the Egyptian people who now still live on the land? And I could go through every single government on the planet. The people still exist, but the governments have come and gone. So people are always superior to the governments that have served them. What are the governments doing? What they're doing is they have now moved into a position where they are aggressively moving to subjugate the human race at every level. Well, who is superior? The governments that are trying to do that, and the people who are running those are the masses of humanity who are called upon to master that perversion. So the first thing I'm sharing is, hey, we have to have an adjustment in the way that we view these things. Hamas is doing what Hamas is doing because it's operating in a manner and dimension that's contrary to the very fabric of how God created the planet and his entire creation. They are no longer operating under authority. That's something you and I have talked about quite a bit.
Yep.
They're
Yep.
no longer operating under authority. They're operating under power. And the power is what gives them authority. Okay, at what point do we stand up and say, no, that's not going to happen. No more. That isn't what's going to occur. We are going to learn to live differently. Now, to start thinking that way, we have to start thinking proactively, not reactively. See, we look at our government, we complain about all the stuff that's going on, we create all these conspiracy elements. Hey, listen, man, this is what governments do. Why do we think our founding fathers set up this country the way they did? Because this is the norm. So in our country, we have the ability to stand up and not react, but to stand up and say, no, we're not doing that anymore. That isn't how this is going to work. Now, once that happens in this country, which, by the way, in order for the entire world to be subjugated, America is the one that has to be first subjugated. We're the ones that have to be reduced to a subject population. Well, guess what? You can complain, you can bitch, you can moan and groan, you can do all kinds of stuff. That's total reaction. But the moment you have a shift in your thinking that says, no, 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 that's not how this works. We are superior to the government that is there to serve us. No, we're not going to react anymore. What we are going to do is we're going to stand up and say, no more. That's not what's going to happen. And by the way, we just happen to have facilities with the internet and stuff like that, that we can get that kind of word out like crazy in a matter of no time. You know, everybody walk out on their street on a particular day with their white handkerchief in their hand, you know, or whatever color that you have, and 100 million, you know, citizens say, no, you will stop, and you will stop now. This is how this is going to work. We're not interested in polls anymore. We're not interested in the fabrication. What we're going to do is we're going to actually give notice to you. This is going to end. Now, that may sound strange to somebody, but what I'm talking about is a change of attitude and a change of perspective that starts to realign our position in relationship to the leadership of governments that are functioning. No, that isn't how this is going to work. Now, some people may think that's a little bizarre. Well, how is that going to change what's happening in, you know, with Hamas? Well, I don't know how it's going to change with Hamas, but what I will say to you is once the United States comes under the authority of its population, which is the American people, once it comes under the authority of the American people, the rest of the world will start coming in line. Why? Because it's obvious. That's where God has put us. You know, we are the guardians of the estate. We're the ones who have been entrusted with that in our time. And now it's our choice as to whether or not we're going to stand up and say, no, we're not going to be subject to this any longer. We are superior to the very government that we have formed. So, gone a lot of different directions there, but
Yeah,
the intention is to create a shift in our thinking first. If that doesn't happen first, we keep having what we have.
Okay. So if I were to summarize that in general, obviously it starts with me and it starts with you, right? So this is our own thinking. And obviously, as you pull yourself back from all of this, I don't think that it's uncommon to ask the question, why, right? You see these things. And I think that the reason I value your opinion, Steve, and there's so many reasons, right? But I look at this and I say, all right, when I do back up and I do see what is this creation, right? By just looking around this place, I go, you know what? This is pretty amazing, right? There's an abundance around me. When I don't see man's hands to things, I see the birds of the trees and the, you know, flowers of the field, and I see the seed in its abundance when aligned with the creation. So I see these things that this creation is, and I see the beauty of it and all of those things. And then, of course, you know, I see the things where there is joy and peace and patience and kindness and love and all of the things that I can recognize as right, good stuff.
Yeah.
And then I see these things, and I understand what you're saying as far as the shift of perspective. It makes sense to me that, that is the starting point of all of this. I think also the caution of understanding that a lot of times people want us to react,
Yeah.
and really without thought, right? Just an initial response and reaction. And what's hard about this is we've got so many different opinions swirling, right? And
Yeah.
so many different conspiracy theories, and being able to discern what is correct and what is not is not easy. And of course, from all of the streams that we've done, 24 of them to this point in time, you've always said the same thing to me, and that is, hey, why don't you ask him yourself, right? Why don't you ask him? He's alive and he speaks. Aside from that, looking at tomorrow, right? And so this declaration, and I put myself in those shoes. I like to examine the edges of this thing. And I
Yeah.
imagine myself as someone who has been a radicalized 20-year-old kid who has been caught up in, what is seen like a helpless and hopeless situation. And, how do gangs form, right? How do all of these things form? We offer something to someone that is hopeful. Well, when you don't have hope, when you don't have progress, when you don't have family, when you don't have support, those that come around and say, "Ha, here's a way in which you can have this glory and you can honor something and have hope," and it's by killing someone else. And when I see that ideology and I see that the only hope that we have, or this person believes they have, is one of um, this destructive thinking, right? And you obviously say, "I'm going to slay my brother." Um, how much of this is the peach that's on the table? And what I mean by that, if you guys haven't listened to what we've talked about in our streams, is that I'm just struck by the fact that when I was a kid, obviously there wasn't communications like this. I couldn't see daily, and it wasn't until the Gulf War where we saw the war on CNN, right? And then the 24-hour news cycle, and now independent journalism, and now real time data and conversations about this. You're saying, hey, this is the nature of war, and where is the origins of war? But it's all also being exposed,
Yeah.
and it's very difficult to hide your perspective. It's hard to your motivations, hard to hide those things. And I think that I don't want to get so calloused that I just assume it's evil from every angle,
Yeah.
right? And where I fall into a lot of times is to say, yeah, it would be really convenient because I go back and I listen to Benjamin Netanyahu tell about regime change in Iran and Iraq and basically this vision. And then I see him on the 22nd of this month say, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to buddy up with Saudi Arabia, and we're going to put a pipeline all the way into Europe, and we're going to get the oil and gas revenue from Europe. Now that, the pipelines have been destroyed, we're going to be the ones. Economic value. We just got to get rid of these people. And if you look back to one of the first times Benjamin Netanyahu was ever in front of Congress, you know what he said? The best thing we could do to Iran for regime change at that time, the popular show on television was Melrose Place and 90210. And he
Hmm.
says, all we have to do is pipe that into that. And in a way, that has effectively created this secular culture within Iran. Obviously, not the leadership of clerics, but it's really interesting to me, and I think about that motivation, and I think about this. It's hard for me to imagine, is there anyone who wants to rule in God's nature and character? Because I almost look at the whole situation and say you're suspect all the way across the board,
Yeah.
that it is defiled, if you will, and that each side, wants to get some moral high ground, but it's used as a means to an end. And
Yeah.
in many cases, there's an economic end to it. So, for example, and I'm not saying that this is the case, but this is potentially one of the ways. Let's let our guard down. Let's act like we don't know that this is coming. And we will sacrifice some of our innocent people to be able to be morally outraged and get the world to come out against this group so we can completely annihilate them, completely subdue anyone who would be adversarial to us. And then we essentially have the ability to you know make the money. And I even hate to articulate that because it's also couched in this ideology of genocide. I mean, it's rooted firmly in a group of people just because who they are
Yeah.
should be exterminated. And so on one hand, I'm very cautious about saying that's not right. That is not right. That is, someone that wants to destroy you just because you are a certain, people group. We've seen that before. And, the crazy thing about this is if those in the region do team up together to eliminate the Jews, this has happened before. And, we see where that went. And it's like, so what, I understand it's not very practical in my mind to just say, hey, I'm going to think differently and say, no, I agree. I mean, that's the correct thing personally for me. But as far as well, it doesn't affect me, Steve. I live in Texas and we've got a volleyball game tonight. Right. And my heart is like, I'm troubled by all of this of what I see and everything. And I'm like, what can we do? And well, we're going to say no. We're going to say no to who? And, you know, on the other hand, I think about the long-term impacts of this. For people in crypto, it's like, well, there goes the bull run, right? We're gonna have to wait till at least the halvening. Um, here are the warmongers getting their wars again, and potentially here we go with World War III. But then on the other hand, I say, well, it's kind of foretold that this would be the case, and this has to fail. And what will come out of its ashes potentially will be better, and there will be a day. Um, but it's depressing, Steve. For me, I'm just giving you my honest opinion. Should I not feel that way?
No, I mean, I don't know how you don't feel depressed, upset, enraged. I mean, I don't know how a thinking, feeling person cannot have the full range of emotions about what's going on. Um, but but there are no perfect solutions. There's only perfect problems. And so a problem that exists has to begin with something that's counter to it. A problem doesn't just occur out of nothingness. It, like everything else, has a genesis point. Um, and so when we look at the planet right now, and I'm speaking primarily of the forces that are controlling it, you mentioned the peach. Well, the peach, when it first comes off the tree and set it on the center of a table, looks really awesome. It puts off a wonderful aroma. It's very inviting. It invites you to partake of it, to consume it. Um, it looks beautiful. It's at the peak of its power to entice and to persuade and to nourish. Okay. You leave that peach on the table long enough, and I think this is what you're talking about, is eventually the rot that is in the center of that peach, that is a part of its nature, will eventually come out from the inside out to the point where that rot now becomes visible to us. We can see it. We smell the stench. The look of it is repulsive. In fact, everything about it repulses us from participating in it, from consuming it, from partaking of its poison. And if we just leave it alone, it will disintegrate all by itself on that. And then what will we do? Well, at some point, we'll go over there and we'll clean it up and we'll remove it from our presence and say, no, I'm not going to tolerate that any longer. Your time of power has passed. We would never look at it in its rotten state and say that it's at the pinnacle of its power.
Yeah.
We'd say just the opposite. And then we'd rise up and go take care of it, clean it up. Why? Because that's what we've been naturally trained to do. And yet, what are we looking at here? we're seeing the peach of forces of government that are controlling the world that are in a state of absolute rottenness. Their rottenness is on full display for all of us to see. And yet, how do we react to it? As if it's at the peak of its power.
Yeah.
No, folks, it's not at the peak of its power. If you, again, if you could see and would learn to see beyond the superficial, what you would recognize, and that's why I mentioned it earlier, from the spiritual perspective, that kingdom is collapsing. It's in a state of utter civil war, and it is desperate to try to reach the finish line before it crumbles. And so what we are observing is we are observing a power that is in the state of desperation. You know, if you ever watch boxing or MMA or stuff like that, when somebody knows that they're behind, what do? They start laying haymakers or doing, if they have energy, if they have anything left in the tank, they're just swinging and whack. I mean, they no longer care about the strategic importance of setting up their opponent. They just let her rip. Well, that's what we're seeing.
Yep.
We're seeing everywhere around the world this overt the only word I can think about is this overt and aggressive behavior and attitude to subjugate people through the instrument of government. I don't care if it's Canada. We could talk an hour about all the nonsense that's going up there. We can talk about Australia. We can talk about, we can talk about America for hours. The stuff that you look at, that I'm 72, so when I was 20 years old, let me tell you what, none of this stuff was even remotely going on. And there was a lot of craziness happening then because I grew up in the 60s.
Yep.
You know, and to me, it's my generation that actually kicked a lot of this stuff off. But it's like, no, if we maintain, we know how to do this. Okay? Yeah, I've got a lot of stuff on my plate, but one of the things I need to learn how to do is to stop reacting to things and start looking at them, taking a step back and start learning how to operate in my role as a human being on the planet. And if I don't do that, this is what the outcome will continue to be. Why? Because I'm giving it permission to function.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a person who struggles with weight, who gets disgusted because they're so very heavy and they want to change that. Well, okay, I certainly understand that. I've had my own baggage of things in the past where I didn't like, you know, where I was. I'm not talking about weight, but in other areas of my life. Well, the thing is that I have to come to terms with is I didn't get that way in a week or 2 or 10. It took me years to get to the place where now my own stench, if you will, whatever that might look like, my own stench was starting to show itself. Well, what did I do to change that? I had to have a change of mind.
Yeah.
That's where it starts. We talk about, you know, so often, you know, there's the 12-step programs. What do you have to do? You have to get to the bottom. Why? Because from the bottom, you're now ready to make a different decision, a different choice, have a different way of thinking. That's the way we are, in my view, on the planet.
Yeah.
The alarm is sounding. Folks, are you ready to start thinking in a different way?
The challenge is there's a lot of historical documents that show that this either pendulum swings or this is a cycle that it comes and it goes. And, many who have looked at generational things look at this as a crisis era. There's a comment here that I want to point out because it's thoughtful.
Yeah.
Um, and so Robert Ospina 10,
Okay.
Robert O. Ospina 10. I don't think it's as much an ideology as a feeling of irreversible despair, a disease of hate and envy. Cain didn't have a killing ideology. He killed from a history of envy, which led to hate. I really appreciate that comment. And then the follow up comment says if we label it an ideology, we separate the enemy as other when the truth is it could happen to any of us. And I really
Yeah.
appreciate because this is a very thoughtful
Yeah.
comment.
Yeah.
And I want to recognize that. I think it's very important, and I want to kind of correct my language. There is, you know, I think about any process of enslavement, and we kind of talk about this, when we give our authority away or we are in desperation, we're clinging to anything that would give us some potential hope. And, there's a lot of ways of looking at this, of saying, all right, if you've ever had a child that's dealt with mental illness, or I've had a parent who dealt with these things, there's a lot of irrational behavior and thought processes that are going on. And, to somebody that's in good health mentally, it seems crazy, right? We even label it as crazy. But I agree with you. You get to this point, and you even said this about weight, where you are literally disgusted with yourself. And those who do come out of it have to recognize, hey, there's a problem that I've created here, and I'm going to have to do something differently. I'm going to have a change of heart and mind. And I think it's important. I'm very cautious about labeling, groups of people, right? Because I don't want to be doing exactly what I'm railing against. Um, but when you do see, and it seems more fundamental, and I think part of the reason I wanted to have you on the stream, Steve, is I feel like I get caught up in this stuff. I'm a high feeler. I really am like, it actually kind of makes me sick, to be honest with you, when I see this stuff. But I have this desire and curiosity to understand what's going on in the world because I feel like we have a role to play in it. Um, and to speak about these things because, I'm extremely hopeful. Um, but what is unfortunate about these current circumstances and the threats of, a day of jihad tomorrow is that, the people that I watched in that family home that clearly were not anticipating this day being their last,
Yeah.
is that I imagine those that have come across our southern border, for example, right? There's a tremendous number of sleeper cell folks. And, there's a lot of reports that for the last several years, they've been importing people through the southern border who actually are being set up for days like tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I just imagine the mom pushing a stroller in New York City or wherever it may be. And, I think about where do you have to be? And to this point, you know, you know, getting into irreversible despair
Yeah.
to a point in which I would just say the only option for me is to destroy human life. And so, um, Magic Monkey, thanks for being here from Baghdad. I love to see that there are friends from everywhere around the world. I appreciate you being here. Um, and so I just appreciate those comments. And there's a lot of them in here. Our friend Pineapple Love is back sharing with us about our energies and how much higher we need to get those energies. I appreciate that. Liberty or Death is here. Um, Hornet UK. Miracles happen. Yes, they do. Um, Liberty or Death. I hear this as well. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing, and that's really why I'm talking to you, Steve. I mean, I think about this as like, what can we do? And I certainly want to protect my, um, I want to protect my family.
Yeah.
I want to make wise decisions. I want to lead in a way that is reflective of God's nature and character, to bless and protect those. Um, and also want to, encourage people who are struggling and suffering, right? And provide them with a perspective that, hey, I've read the book and I know how it ends and what this story really is. Um, is there a hopeful story in this as we look into the rottenness of the peach Is there hope from your perspective?
Oh yeah, I mean, there is a ton of hope. Um, I mean, I don't know. I only have a certain vocabulary that is available to me, and which is the way it works for all of us. And so, anytime you speak an idea or a concept, there's going to be all kinds of response to it, and reaction to it, and agreement and disagreement. That's just the nature of thinking human beings, which is awesome. The the wonderful part of it on a show like this is we can speak these things and then leave them for people to evaluate on their own, decide if it's helpful or not. And to me, the great hope is I am one decision away from starting to turn this thing around. I mean, think about it for just a second. One single decision. Jesus, I want to learn how to live the way that you live. I want to learn how to live with you and to hear your voice and to perform my role with you on the planet in the way that you have created me to operate. I don't know how to do it. I don't have the resources to do it. I don't know the first thing about it, but man, I'm interested in learning how to do that. The reality is that's how simple the change can begin to happen, and it will happen very, very quickly. You've seen it in your own life.
Oh yeah.
Literally in 1 minute, there was a marked shift. Now, to our friend's point, that wasn't a matter of ideology or an irreversible sense of despair. Well, Matt, you were in a pretty bummed out state. How long did the bum last?
Yeah.
About 30 seconds.
Yeah, it led up to this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And boom, there it went. So to me, I'm incredibly hopeful about the whole thing. And the thing that I would offer without being too cryptic about the whole thing is I'll just use what Jesus used with me about the alarm. I'm setting the alarm. And what happens with an alarm? It is violent, it shakens, it awakes us in a violent way to do what? To get us out of our slumber. And we're seeing the alarm go off at an alarming rate. And my encouragement would be that, hey, don't lose despair. Instead, play the hand that's been dealt to you, and one of those cards is the decision to simply say, Jesus, teach me how to do this your way. And then watch what happens. To me, that's the hope. That's what changes. And by the way, Matt, why that's so important is we have been trained to think that technology is going to change the world. Technology doesn't change the world. Character changes the world. That's what changes the world. What are we seeing? We're seeing a violent, evil nature beginning to display itself openly. And what's it doing? It's wrecking the world. So, what is it going to change that? An attitude, a nature, and a character that is good at its core. That's what will change the world. And that's one decision away from that happening.
Well, I appreciate you coming in, Steve. It's it just shows you how important community is, right? Because I feel like I can get stuck. I can get into a spot where I just, in some cases, are overwhelmed by things, right? And to have a friend like you who can say, hey, let's back out, let's understand this from a number of different levels and layers, and also have the hope to know that, these things can change in a moment. And obviously it starts right with you.
Yeah.
And I think that I love the consistency of that message because I know that it is true. Steve, thank you for coming on today. I appreciate that. We're going to be on with Steve tomorrow, and one of Steve's longtime buddies, I'm calling the regular Joe. He's going to be on tomorrow. We're going to be live at 11 a.m. Central Time for Right Side Up with Steve Saggs. So, Steve, thanks for cracking off a little bit for me on a Thursday in these crazy times that we live in. But thank you, as always, for your perspective.
Thank you for asking. Appreciate it.
All right. Appreciate you, man. All right, folks, there we go. So the big, clickbait of this stream was Friday the 13th, which is tomorrow. We have folks in the world calling for jihad, a day of jihad. And of course, knowing what I've known, seeing what I've seen, I want to be on alert. And it's hard to make sense of all of this stuff. And especially as it relates to black swans, because black swans are often used in the economic world. I don't know whether we're going to see an absolute collapse of the markets. I don't know. There are people who are saying that we're going to see $10,000 Bitcoin and $600 Ethereum. That's crazy. We were hopeful that it would be an Uptober, right? We thought, oh, October is going to be a green month, and we're going to lead ourselves into the end of the year and then into the halvening, and we're going to see this great bull run. But if there's anything I know about the markets and seeing these things now 3 or 4 times happen, right? So we had 87 crash, we had the .com era implosion, and they keep getting deeper, right? And if you think about that, with where we are as a nation, where we are economically, every time these things do fail, it is carnage, right? People lose all kinds of value. But I look at what comes out of these things, and it's the cycles of which I think Steve is pointing out as well, is that these things are a reflection of this human experience in the upside down world that we live in. And so when it comes to crypto, when it comes to the economic order, we may not be done. We may not be done, and we may have not seen the bottom. But as we look to make sense of this future, this is going to be probably one of the most incredible years. 2024 is going to be a really interesting time. We thought it was over. We're like, yeah, well, we got through the Charlie 19, and then it's aliens, and now it's this. Well, if there's anything that is consistent, it is change. But folks, I tell you what, I have hope not only from the perspective of faith, but also have from the perspective of what I see in this community, and that's people like you coming together from all different viewpoints, all different backgrounds, all different races, genders, orientations, and high-fiving each other because of a financial product. Because that financial product is, in my opinion, being used to get your attention to say, hey, there is the possibility of a future, but that future isn't one in which we just step on other people's heads to get what we want. But in the great words of the great John Nash, who won the Nobel Prize for mathematics, for game theory, the Nash equilibrium, that movie, A Beautiful Mind, was made about him. He said, if we consider others in addition to ourselves, we all win. Well, what is the very nature of Hex and the Pulse chain and crypto in general? But that a group of people that would come together around a communication, a free speech communication network, around immutable contracts and code with self-custody of keys, being able to have an opportunity regardless of where they live and under what regime they find themselves. This is an exciting time because we know that the resources are required in order for us to animate the tools for good. And of course, what I want to remind you of on every stream that I do is that what is it that our responsibility is? Our responsibility is to lead in the nature and character, and we animate the tools for good. And so whether it's the internet, it's crypto, it's blockchain technology, or it's the very, money that comes from that, is that how are we going to use it to bless and protect those that we are entrusted with in the spheres of influence that we have? Because as I look out into this future where there will be a future of abundance, I and Steve often call it the kingdom of God, right? This idea that there would be a place of abundance where things are aligned with the very nature of creation, that we don't do things apart from God, that we don't step on other people's heads to get what we want, but actually in community, we come together and we go, you know what? We will animate these things and be considerate of those and others. And, I see it as almost a concentric circles, right? That continue to grow of abundance that ultimately overlap. Because what happens when you find yourself in abundance? You do not have the power of war in your hands. And I think about this. Is there a possibility that this is all working together? So people, good people like you and me that have resources will be able to bless and protect people with those. Let's not forget we are the sovereigns in this situation. Governments are there by our own request, and they are subordinate to us, not the other way around. And I think in this crisis area, we're going to have to see that we are going to have an opportunity to animate these tools of government, and we may have to abolish or change them in order that we can create a future that is more fair, that is more free. So, folks, don't let your hearts be troubled. Be careful and watch out for yourself and others and your family, and just be aware of what's going on around you. Take care of yourself. We'll catch you tomorrow at 11 o'clock for Right Side Up with Steve Staggs and the regular Joe. Take care of yourself and don't mess with Texas, folks. Take care.